Thank you very much indeed, Hannah, and thank you to everyone here this evening. It's a great pleasure to host this event on behalf of Intelligence Squared, and it's a huge pleasure to introduce Thomas L. Friedman, possibly the world's most famous journalist, although Clark Kent might take issue with that. He's the lead foreign affairs columnist for the New York Times, and he's won the Pulitzer Prize 3 times. He's the author of several books, the most recent of those being Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations, which was published just a couple of years ago. And he's well known for filing reports from the furthest ends of the Earth, although I don't know if you've made outer space yet, Tom. Maybe that's next to come. So it's pretty amazing that we managed to actually tie him down in London for just a couple of hours today. Tom, a pleasure to talk to you, and I have to say that you have a little competition this evening, because to be here, I'm having to miss the international evening at my daughter's grade school.
Oh, wow.
And they promised Macedonian folk dancing.
Wow.
So your international evening is going to have to measure up pretty high to compete with that, I have to say.
I'm going to work.
Before we start our conversation, though, Tom, I think you perhaps might want to just lay out the ground for us for a few minutes and tell us how the world looks now as you see it in 2019.
Well, first of all, thank you for doing this, and thank Intelligence Squared for hosting me, and thank you all for coming out. This is just, it's wonderful. I think to understand everything I'm going to talk about tonight, you have to understand how I approach writing a column. And my motto, which I learned from my teacher, Lynn Wells, who teaches at Defense University in Washington, is never think in the box, never think out of the box. Today you have to think without a box. And what I'm going to share with you is basically everything I talk about tonight will be under that framework. So my last book, Thank You for Being Late, is really about, underneath, it's kind of how I organize a column. And to write a column in the New York Times, basically I think you have to combine 3 chemicals. A news story is meant to inform, and I could write a news story about this event tonight, and Rana would tell me whether I inform better or worse. But a column, what I do, an opinion piece, is actually meant to provoke. It's actually meant to produce a reaction. So I'm either in the heating business or the lighting business. That's basically what I do. I'm either doing a heating or a lighting. I'm either stoking up an emotion in you or I'm illuminating something for you. And if I really do it well, I do both. And I know I've succeeded if you read one of my columns and you say, I didn't know that. That's good. I provided some light. I never looked at it that way. That's good. More light. I never connected those things. More light. Your favorite as a columnist, you kind of live for this, happens 3 times a year. When people say, I read your column, and Mr. Friedman, you said exactly what I felt, but didn't know how to say. God bless you. God bless you. And then there's, I want to kill you dead, you and all your offspring. That's when I create a little heat. But I explain to people that to create heat and light requires a chemical reaction. You have to actually combine 3 chemicals. One is your value set. What are the values you're pushing out in the world? Are you a communist, a capitalist, a neocon, a neoliberal, a libertarian, a Marxist, a Keynesian? What values really animate you? Second, and this will be the thrust of what I'm going to talk about, is how do you think the machine works? So the machine is my shorthand for what are the biggest forces shaping more things in more places in more ways on more days. And as a columnist, I'm always working on that. That's what my books are about. I'm always trying to update, how do I think the machine works today? Because what I'm trying to do as a columnist is take my values and push that machine in their direction. And if I don't know how it works, I either won't push it or I'll push it in the wrong direction. And lastly, what have you learned about people and culture? Because there's no column without people, there are no people without culture. How does the machine's movement affect different people? And how does their movement affect the machine? Stir those together, let it rise, bake for 45 minutes, and if you do it right, you too can be columnists in the New York Times. So what I want to share with you, just for starters, Ron, is how I think the machine works today. And I think what is shaping more things in more places, in more ways, on more days, is that we are in the middle of 3 nonlinear accelerations, all at the same time, with the 3 largest forces on the planet, which I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. So if they just cue up the PowerPoint for 1 second, get that going. And so if you put Mother Nature on a graph, And Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth in the developing world. So if you put Mother Nature on a graph or in a picture, it looks like this is Glacier National Park in America, 1913, and Glacier National Park, 2012. That glacier was there for 7,000 years. That's Lake Chad up there, the big blue thing, in 1963, and that's Lake Chad, 2013. Put Mother Nature on a graph, she looks like a graph of global average temperature. She looks like a big hockey stick. Put Mother Nature on a graph, she looks like a graph of extreme weather, another hockey stick. Or put Mother Nature on a graph, the mother of all hockey sticks, world population growth through history. So if you put Mother Nature on a graph today, she is one big accelerating hockey stick. Now, the market for me is globalization, but not your grandfather's globalization. That was containers on ships and planes. That's actually pretty flat today. What's globalizing the world and knitting it together today is actually digital globalization. Though everything's being digitized and globalized through online courses, through PayPal, through Facebook, through Twitter, etc. Put globalization on a graph today, it looks like another hockey stick. Total data consumed per month. Or it looks like another hockey stick, mobile cellular subscriptions in the United States, in the UK, in France, in Gabon. The graph all looks the same, another hockey stick. And lastly, put globalization on a graph, it looks like global internet users, another hockey stick. The last acceleration is in Moore's Law. So Moore's Law was coined in 1965 by Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, who posited in a famous article in Electronics magazine that the speed and power of microchips will double every 24 months, and the price would stay roughly the same. Moore's Law has held up for 54 years, and if you put it on the graph, it looks like the mother of all hockey sticks. The power of microchips just doubling, doubling, and doubling. This PowerPoint's running on a laptop back there. It actually has, I'm pretty sure, an Intel 14 nanometer chip in it. It has 35 million transistors per square millimeter. Last January, Intel began shipping its 10 nanometer chip. It has 100 million transistors per square millimeter. What's the difference between 35 million and 100 million? It's the difference between a self-driving car that needs that needs the whole trunk of the car to contain the brains of the car, and a self-driving car that needs a little box under the front seat. Now, a few years ago, Intel decided to explain the power of this Moore's Law acceleration. They got their engineers to try to figure out what would have happened if you took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle and it had improved at the same rate as microchips had since 1971. And they estimated that if that had happened, that VW Beetle today would go 300,000 miles an hour, it would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost you 4 cents. You'd be able to drive it your entire life on a single tank of gas. That is the power of the technological exponential driving our lives.
But we also break down and reboot every 10 minutes.
That's probably true. But to tie it up, Rana, that I think that we're in the middle of 3 giant hockey stick accelerations in the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law, and they're not just changing your world. They're reshaping your world. And they're reshaping 5 realms in particular, and that's what Thank You for Being Late is about. They're reshaping politics, geopolitics, the workplace, ethics, and community.
Tom, thank you very much for the really very broad and very wide oversight of these various factors interacting with each other. And let's get straight to the analysis
Please.
of some of these factors. Now, one of the things that you've written about, but I think really bears some examination, is the confluence of 2 particular dates. They're historical dates, but not very far in history, 2007, 2008. And you pointed out that in some ways, the fact that we associate 2008 with perhaps the greatest financial crisis we've had in the post-Cold War era has overshadowed the creation of what you call a supernova in 2007, the year before. Could you tell us a bit more about how those 2 dates come together?
Absolutely. So my chapter actually on Moore's Law in my book is called What the Hell Happened in 2007? What the hell happened in 2007? I know what you're thinking. What's this guy talking about? 2007? Such an innocuous year. Well, here's what happened in 2007. The year was kicked off actually on January 9th at the Moscone Center in San Francisco when a guy named Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone. That iPhone is actually a handheld computer with more compute power in it than the Apollo space mission. And they tell me it doubles as a phone and a camera. That's how the year was kicked off. In 2007, it's actually late 2006, a company called Facebook opened its platform to anyone with a registered email address. And in 2007, Facebook broke out of high schools and universities and went global. In 2007, a company called Twitter split off on its own independent platform and went global. In 2007, the most important software you've never heard of, called VMware, went public. VMware is what enables any operating system to work on any computer. It's the foundation of cloud computing. In 2007, the second most important software you've never heard of is called Hadoop, named after the founder's son's toy elephant, was launched into the wild. Hadoop's what enables 1 million computers to work together as if they're one. I think that's called big data. Hadoop didn't invent those algorithms. They're actually invented by Google. They're called GFS and MapReduce. But as Doug Cutting, the founder of Hadoop, explains in the book, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was leave a trail of breadcrumbs for the open source community to reverse engineer their big data algorithm, and Hadoop was the free public version, and everyone in business here is actually running it in the background. In 2007, the third most important software you've never heard of, called GitHub, opened its doors. It's the largest repository of open source software with 15 million users, and for the geeks among you will appreciate the irony of it was bought last year by Microsoft. In 2007, a company called Google launched a little-known TV company. It was called YouTube. And in 2007, Google launched into the wild its own operating system. They called it Android. In 2007, IBM launched the world's first cognitive computer. They called it Watson. In 2007, a guy up in Seattle named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first ebook reader. He called it the Kindle. In 2007, a company called Netflix streamed its first video. In 2007, late 2006, the internet crossed 1 billion users. Seems to have been a tipping point. In 2007, an anonymous Japanese cryptocurrency expert launched an essay that launched a cryptocurrency. It was called Bitcoin. In 2007, 3 design students in San Francisco were attending the design conference that year, and they noticed all the hotel rooms were sold out. But one of them had 3 spare air mattresses. And they thought it might be cool to see if they could rent their air mattresses out to people who couldn't get hotel rooms. And it worked out so well for them. In 2007, they started a company called Airbnb. Yeah, that's where the title comes from. Their 3 air mattresses. Now, here's what else happened in 2007. Get the PowerPoint up again. So this is a graph of the cost of sequencing a human genome. You'll notice it's $100 million in 2001. It falls to $10 million in 2006. And then you'll notice it goes over a cliff, like an EKG heading for a heart attack in 2007. In 2007, solar energy took off, as did a process for extracting natural gas from tight shale called fracking. Between 2006 and 2008, America's total natural gas reserves increased by 35%, a staggering number for an 18-month period. And this is one of my favorite graphs. This is a picture of social networks. So that white line going down, that's the cost of generating a megabit of data. And you'll notice it collapses in 2007. The blue line is the speed of generating that data. The 2 lines cross in 2008, close enough for government work. This is a graph, one of my favorites, of cloud computing. The first year we get statistics is 2008, which means the cloud was born around 2007. In 2007, Intel for the first time went off silicon to extend Moore's law, introduced non-silicon materials into its microchips. In 2005, Rana, Michael Dell retired, the founder of Dell Computers. And in 2007, he decided he better come back to work. Turns out, friends, 2007, I believe, will be understood in time as one of the single greatest technological inflection points since Gutenberg, and we all completely missed it. And why did we miss it? Because of 2008. Yeah, right when our physical technologies took off, like we're on a moving sidewalk at an airport that suddenly went from 5 to 50 miles an hour, right when that happened, our social technologies, the learning reform, management reform, regulatory reform, you'd want to go with such an incredible acceleration, all froze because we entered the deepest recession since 1929. And in that gap between what happened to our physical technologies and what happened to our social technologies, many, many Trump and Brexit voters were born because many people got completely dislocated.
Tom, it's a story both of immense promise and potentially very apocalyptic. Let's take apart some of the elements of it.
Please.
One other thing that we had back in 2007, some would argue, was privacy and the chance of accountable government. And it's notable that in your account of how the world has changed immeasurably, maybe irreversibly in the last 10 or 11 years, you mentioned Microsoft, you mentioned Intel, you mentioned Google. In other words, you've mentioned a huge variety of very powerful corporations, none of which are accountable to democratic processes in the ways that governments are. Shoshana Zuboff has written a very well-regarded book recently which has looked at what she calls surveillance capitalism. In other words, are we living these days in a consumer paradise where essentially we have sold our privacy and our capacity as citizens to a bunch of corporations who nobody ever voted for?
It's a very good question. And so the way I kind of think about the internet age, well, to put it in American baseball terms, like the first inning was fantastic. Oh, suddenly we got email and Siri and Google and search. But the second inning has been a real bear, okay? Because the second inning was when all these things became apparent. I did I had an interesting conversation, which I turned into a column around a couple of weeks ago, with the people who run the SAT program in America, the College Board. And they run the SATs and the SAT2s, which drill down into some specialties. And David Coleman, Stephanie Sanford, they concluded that there are many things a high school student needs to know when they graduate high school. But they decided there are actually two things that every high school student must know. Two codes: how to code a computer and the code of the US Constitution. And Mark Zuckerberg is exhibit A of somebody who took the first course and never took the second course. And,
well, he did drop out of Harvard after all.
Yes, I'm afraid he didn't get to con law. And the reason I say this is that, so a column, where columns come from in my head, I don't really know. It's kind of a chemical thing. So I'll tie this point up by just going roundabout for a second. People are often, they're really trying to be nice and polite, and so they come up to you and say, like this week, people say, hey, you're working on a new book. And I say, geez, I just wrote a book about the 3 largest forces on the planet reshaping the world, and I don't have 3 new ones this year, okay? But as I thought about that, it made me sit back and think, well, what am I doing? You know, what am I seeing? And you really touched on it, right? Actually, what I realized what's going on is all these forces are just going deep. So my wife is building a language museum in Washington. It's called Planet Word. It'll be the world's first interactive word language museum. It'll be open in a year. And so my wife likes to come home. She's a real word person. And at the end of the year, she always tells me what the word of the year is. Because the online dictionaries can now track that. So a couple of years ago it was they, transgender people, one called he, she, one called they. Last year, interesting, on Webster's Merriman, the word of the year was justice. Most looked up word. Interesting. So I did a column saying, I can tell you what the word of the year is going to be for 2019. Close the contest now. And I think the word of the year is going to be deep. As in deep fake, deep surveillance, deep insight, deep mind, deep knowledge. All these technologies are going deep, Rana, but as your question implied, without a lot of the privacy, ethical, regulatory considerations that we need as these things go deep. And it's actually interesting if you watch the Oscars, because I do believe things are in the zeitgeist. What was the song of the year? It was Lady Gaga, The Shallow. But you actually have to listen to the song. What's the song about? We're leaving the shallow now. We're off in the deep end. And I really think that there's something in the zeitgeist that people sense that these technologies are going deep, and we have not put in place the governing mechanisms or the ethical mechanisms. And you know, one of the reasons I called my book Thank You for Being Late is because it's actually in celebration of everything old and slow. I really believe the faster the world gets, the more all the things you cannot download, but all the things you actually have to upload the old-fashioned way, good parenting to good child, good teacher to good student, good pastor to good flock, good bureaucrat to good citizen. I think all the old stuff matters more than ever. And as we go deep, I think it's going to matter even more.
But could I press you, Tom, on who that we is?
Right.
Because I want to point out that all of the companies you mentioned and the society which it exists in operate in our part of the world. But you could have mentioned Baidu, you could have mentioned Tencent, you could have mentioned Alibaba. In other words, a huge alternative universe, really, where technology meets not liberal politics, but actually authoritarian politics. And people will look at China, which is of course where I'm talking about, second biggest economy in the world, developing 5G, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and using it for a whole variety of purposes that we in the West might consider in some ways extremely worrying. Isn't there a danger, first of all, that that's going to head in a direction that we have no say over? And second, that a version of that could be our future as well, the surveillance capitalism turning nasty.
Right. So it's a very good question. And I would say this. So I was in Jordan a couple weeks ago, and one of the interesting things I'd seen there I hadn't seen before were people actually tweeting against the king and queen. Saying, the Queen is this or that, and signed Tom Friedman, 7117 Bradley Boulevard, Bethesda, Maryland. So, I've never seen that before. And so I wrote a column about my time there, and I just threw into the middle of the column a literally parenthetical graph. And we get comments on our column, and I noticed how many people commented and said, I'm not interested in Jordan that much, but that graph was kind of interesting. So what did I say? What struck me there in Jordan? I said, I think these social networks and cyber tools are making efficient authoritarians even more efficient. I think they're making soft authoritarians or less efficient authoritarians more vulnerable and frail. And I think they're making democracies ungovernable.
So that's a pretty strong statement. If you're basically saying that
and you may recognize some of that here.
If we keep tweeting, if we keep using the social media that we have, WhatsApping, whatever, in the way we're doing now, with the analog version of politics that we have at the moment, that this is going to end badly.
Yeah, I am net worried, is the way I put it. I see the upside. Those of you who follow me know the New York Times tweets my column. I tweet my column out, but I am not on Twitter. I've actually never looked at Twitter. I don't know what it looks like. If you ask me to tweet something about your book, I will do it. I've maybe done 5 tweets in my life, but I don't know how to do it. My secretary does it for me. And that's because anything said about me in 140 characters by an anonymous person, I'm actually not that interested in. And if I miss the news about the fire or the coup, I'll get it on CNN 5 minutes later. But I'm really worried about a tendency I see in journalism where everybody is looking over their shoulder. What is being said about me, my story? I see this in the Middle East. People who cover controversial stories in the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Well, there's an industry now trying to game them. The one side is attacking you, the other side is attacking you, and that gets in your head. And I just don't want that in my head, okay? Otherwise, you start writing stories for that person. In my world, everybody likes me, because I'm not on Twitter. It's.
I think you're in that place.
No, I know. Believe me, I have no illusions about that. That's the most false statement I make tonight. But what I'm saying is, the New York Times paid me to go out and report on the world and call it as I see it. And if I start responding to every single thing, I'm not going to do that. I happen to be good friends with one of the coaches of an NBA team, we'll go nameless, and we were talking a year ago, and he told me now his players come into the locker room at halftime, fire up their phones, and see what's said about them on Twitter in the first half. And I thought, that is a sign of the apocalypse. That is like, where that goes is only a bad place. And so you have all these people going around looking at their Twitter, and they're not looking at the world, and they're not engaging like this, like we are. I know who my friends are. They're not a thumb up or a thumb down, And I've really learned that, young people sometimes come to me, and I'm 65 now, so I can say young people. Everybody's young in my world. And say, I want to do what you do. What do you need to know? And I said, well, it's really good to know how to type. I learned how to type really fast. In fact, I went to night secretarial school in London 40 years ago to learn how to type fast. I can type really fast. You want to know some history, some politics, some literature, some Chinese history. But I think there's 2 things you need, I think, to be a good journalist. One is you have to like people. I really like people. So I really enjoy hearing their voices, the crazy things they say, they do, they aspire, they fear. And if you can't hear the music, you can't play the music. And there's a few journalists out there who really don't like people.
Could I push you a bit on what you've just said there, though, Tom? Because what it sounds to me as if you're saying, and many people would be very sympathetic with this, is it's okay to know stuff. It's okay to actually write a column based on the fact that you've been places, seen things, done the homework, and that gives you more standing. That gives you more status than maybe someone on Twitter, which you don't read, firing back in 140 characters when that person doesn't really know anything about what they're talking about.
Well, the way I put it is that, my motto is that if you don't go, you don't know. Going doesn't ensure knowing either. You can go to a place and get it completely wrong. Done that too, okay? But I think it reduces the odds that I get it wrong. And that's all I'm trying to do, is increase the odds that I get it right by going and engaging. But I wanted to make the other thing you need to be, I think, an effective journalist is that you have to be a good listener. And it's for two reasons. And the second reason is more important than the first. The first reason is because what you learn when you listen. And the more important reason is what you say when you listen. Listening is a sign of respect. And it's amazing what people will let you say to them or ask of them if they think you respect them. And if they don't think you respect them, you can't tell them it's dark outside. And so listening is so important, yes, for what you learn, but much more for what you say.
Is that why, if I had to find one word to describe your style in columns, it probably would be the word conversational. I mean, it sounds very much as if you're putting forward a style that is as if, look, we're in a pub. My propensity there doesn't have to be a pub, could be a coffee shop, and kind of caught you and we're just having a chat about something. That looks very natural, but actually it strikes me that it's not that easy to do. It doesn't literally come naturally.
Well, the big criticism about me is that, my stuff is too light, too soft, and I should tell you that no reader's ever come up to me and said, that column was too much fun to read. Could you make that more complicated? And
You'd never have been an academic in that
right,
case,
exactly. Could you, just make that harder, more impenetrable? And so I'm just trying to take complex things and explain them for myself. And then if I can do that, I can explain them to other people. Because, and at the front of my book, thank you for being late, I have a quote which is really my motto. It's from Marie Curie, who said, "Now is the time to understand more so we may fear less." And that's the business I want to be in. I want to help people understand more. I may get it wrong, but that's what I'm trying to do. And we have so many people now in my business who have a business model of making people stupid, making actually people confused and stupid and angry. And I have great contempt for that business model. And so I work at breaking things down so I can understand it, so other people can understand it, hopefully, if I've got it right, and that they will fear it less, whether it's globalization or climate change or whatever.
Well, let's take one particular issue which I think is permanent in the news. It's an area you know very well, but frankly is not very well understood, and that is the state of the Middle East at the moment. I know that you've been in the Middle East quite recently. You've written recently columns from Jordan as well as elsewhere in the region. Let's talk about Jordan itself for a moment. You mentioned this particular question about social media, but actually Jordan is one of those places that sort of always slips under the radar. Iran or Egypt or other places tend to grab the headlines more. And yet it's always struck me that it's kind of an anchor state in that part of the Middle East. And an anchor isn't always there. It can be pulled up and removed.
It's a very good way to put it, right? It's a buffer state. Buffer between Israel and Iraq at one point, Israel and Saudi Arabia, Israel also abuts Syria, but it's a place that obviously has absorbed so many refugees. It's been a buffer that way. It's absorbed now Syrian refugees. It absorbed Iraqi refugees. It absorbed Palestinians when they were evicted from the Gulf after Gulf War I. And it's an important buffering state. It's not perfect. It's got all kinds of problems. But boy, we'd miss it if it were gone. It would be, there would be a lot of people grinding directly up.
And how likely do you think it is that it might actually not be there at some point in the near future?
Well, I think what Jordan is worried about very much right now is Jared Kushner's peace plan.
They may not be the only ones.
That's right. I'm worried about Jared Kushner's peace plan. I would say what they're worried about more generally, Ron, is Trump's whole approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, one of the things I've tried to point out, whether America is dealing with Saudi Arabia or Israel or Egypt or Jordan, we played a role historically in the region of being a reality enforcer. Because all these leaders have cabinets or are surrounded by people, ruling circles, with moderates and centrists and some really crazy people. And let's take the Israeli cabinet. And so Netanyahu or his predecessors always needed to say, when one of those crazies stood up and said, let's annex the Golan Heights or let's annex the West Bank, Netanyahu always needed to say, I'd love to do that crazy thing you want to do. I'm totally with you. But the Americans broke my arm, okay? I mean, if I did, the Americans would break my arm. Now, rather than playing that role, we're actually encouraging extreme behavior. I mean, when Trump moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, I got a call from the White House. They never call, but they called on this one and said, just want you to know, we moved the embassy. I'm from the NSC staff. We moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I said, oh, what did you get for it? And there was a silence on the line. And I said to myself, oh, no, don't tell me. Don't tell me you gave it away for free, okay? We just did the same on the Golan Heights. So what gets to Jordans? What are the Jordanians? Well, they gave away the Jerusalem, they gave away the Golan. What's next? The West Bank. And if Trump sort of assents to Israeli annexation, they're tacit or real or formal, well, he knows what's next. That's Jordan's Palestine. And so they're terrified of this right now and extremely, extremely worried. But the other thing going on in Jordan, you really see is, the first Arab Spring really was about democracy and voice. And young Arabs lost their fear in the first Arab Spring. This Arab Spring, if one is brewing now, we see in Algeria, Sudan, Gaza, Jordan, it's going to be about youth unemployment. And that is now a pervasive problem in this part of the world before automation has come there. So wait when automation comes. And so there's a real problem brewing there around youth unemployment.
Is there a particular problem with youth unemployment that is linked actually with graduate training and higher expectations? And I'm thinking here of the fact that a very large number of people who've got involved in extreme terror groups in Egypt actually turn out to have been trained as engineers. Yeah. So they're not sort of peasants out there in the countryside. These are people who have learnt a lot, they have high expectations, the expectations are not fulfilled, yes, and they go in a particular direction.
Yeah, I think that has to do with a broader phenomena of humiliation. So I changed my business card. I brought one, yeah. I have a friend who works for BCG, Martin Rivas, and he changes his business card every month. He just puts out the 6 things he's thinking about. So he got me thinking about that, and I decided that I had to have a business card that actually described what I do. So my business card now says Thomas L. Friedman, New York Times, humiliation, dignity, trust, leadership, culture, community, ownership, and amplification columnist. Okay, because those are actually all the things I'm thinking about.
I hope they pay you for each one of them.
Yeah, I wish they did, but they don't. But for a long time, I used to call myself the New York Times humiliation and dignity correspondent, because I realized I'd really spent a lot of my career covering people acting out on their humiliation and questing for dignity, whether it was China after a century of humiliation, Russia after the Cold War, Palestinians versus Israelis, Muslim youth in Europe versus the Christian majority. There's a lot of people walking around. Humiliation is the single most powerful human emotion I have found, and the quest for dignity. And that gets back to my listening point, why listening is so important. And so you have a lot of young men in this part of the world who have, they've never held power, they've never held a job, and they've never held a girl's hand. And that is a really bad combination.
Where do you see that going? You've identified the phenomenon, you've been to those places, you see what's brewing up. What do you see coming next? It's really hard to know, Ronald. Let me try to expand that question, if I could, into the whole question of what happens to all of these states. Okay, so I have a chapter in the book which is called Control versus Chaos, basically. It comes out of actually American TV show, but the argument I make is that the world was governed by empires for millennia.
until the late 19th and early 20th century, and we broke up into all these nation states, particularly after World War I and decolonization, and then World War II. So much so that we woke up in 1945 and we had a United Nations with like 190 countries. We'd never had so many individual countries before. And the 50 years after World War II were a great time to be a weak little country. If you were a weak little country, that was your era. Why? First of all, there were two superpowers throwing money at you, foreign aid, sending you food aid, building your government house, educating your kids at Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow or Ohio State in America. You could be Syria and lose 3 wars to Israel and get your army rebuilt for free all 3 times. It was a great time to be a weak little state. Number one. Number two, populations were moderate. Number 3, climate change was moderate, really hadn't got kicked in. Number 4, no one had a cell phone. I couldn't see Phoenix or Paris or London, you know. And lastly, China was not in the World Trade Organization. So everybody could be in the low-wage textile business. Now, my argument is that in the early 21st century, around 2007, all of that flips. Now, no superpower wants to touch you because all you win is a bill. Yes, the Russians are in Syria, but they're not rebuilding Syria. They're just actually exploiting Syria for their own, power projection. Number 2, populations now have exploded. So Nigeria will have more people than America by 2050. Africa has 411 million. Africa has 1.2 billion people now. It's projected by the UN to have 2.4 billion in 2050. Climate change is out of control. I did a documentary last year for National Geographic following climate refugees from Senegal through Niger up to Europe. And what you see in Senegal, in these villages in northern Senegal, is there are no men in these villages between the ages of 18 and 65. They've all left because the land can't sustain them anymore, the small-scale agriculture. And it's partly a climate change issue because Senegal's at 2 degrees rise average temperature since the Industrial Revolution. 2 degrees rise average temperature. Where have I heard that number? Oh, that's what the Paris Climate Agreement was designed to prevent by 2100. Senegal's already there. They're going to 4 degrees. And lastly, China is in the World Trade Organization. So nobody can be in the textile business. And so, in fact, I tell a story that I was in Egypt for Tahrir Square, and I was there for 3 weeks away from my wife. And so I told this story in the book. I went home, and I was at the Cairo airport. I went into the Treasures of Egypt souvenir shop to buy my honey, a little something to remind her where her honey was. And let's see, what do they have here? Pyramids, ashtrays, and my honey doesn't smoke. Sphinx, bookends, my honey has plenty of bookends. But over here, they had a stuffed camel, and they had a stuffed camel, and if you squeezed its hump, it honked. And my honey didn't have a honking humped camel. So I picked it up and I turned it over, and what did it say on the bottom? Made in China. Yeah, you're the lowest wage country in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there's now a country half a world away can make your honking humped camel cheaper than you can ship it and sell it for a profit.
Okay, but Tom, let me throw a scenario.
No, let me just finish this.
Oh, right. I'm terrified by the camel, but go on.
So what's happening? Basically, all these weak little states, they're now starting to fracture. And they're starting to hemorrhage people. In the hemisphere I live in, it's primarily Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, who sent us 187,000 unaccompanied minors in the last 4 years. That's just orphans. And in this hemisphere, it's sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and the Middle East. And I think the biggest geopolitical thing happening in the world today, Ron, is the number of people trying to get out of the world of disorder into the world of order, changing the politics of the world of order, creating all these populist nationalist backlashes. And I think the central geopolitical challenge of our time is how do we collaborate with these countries to stabilize the world of disorder? Just as we created a Marshall Plan to stabilize Europe from the movement of communism from east to west, we need to stabilize disorder moving from north to south.
So let me throw a scenario at you, Tom,
Please.
to perhaps respond to that point. Some people say there is an outfit out there that's doing the new Marshall Plan, and that's China's so-called New Silk Road, Belt and Road Initiative. And some aspects of that are trying to deal with the story that you just told. So Ethiopia, very, very interesting country, which I'm sure you've visited.
Yeah, I have.
But next on the list, probably the only place you've not been to yet, where in fact shoe factories are moving from China to Ethiopia. I mean, there are essentially Trump voters in southern China, or the equivalent of, who are saying, the Africans are stealing all our jobs.
Yeah.
Also, China, Japan, South Korea, these places have demographics that are getting older and older. Another big year to come, 2029, when China finally gets older, faster, and large parts actually of the developed Asian world too. And with that Belt and Road Initiative, with a new transport and security network building up across the Eurasian continent looking east, not west, what are the chances of that development maybe either changing, mitigating, or just altering the dynamic you're talking about? People looking east rather than west for that huge migration that we're talking about.
I have a great answer. You tell me. Because so anything in my view, right, that contributes to better governing institutions and real economic activity, I think is a net plus. The things I've read about China's Belt and Road have been ambiguous to me. Some looks exploitative, other looks, like it may have some of that potential. But to me, this is a global project. That this is something the United States, Russia, EU, we should actually be collaborating on.
So in other words, get involved,
way.
Don't
Exactly.
push back.
Exactly. Oh yeah, and try to shape it in a productive way. So I'm not against it on principle at all. I just want to know it's going to actually stabilize these countries. But I think that, what are we doing in America? We're actually doing just the opposite. Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement at a time when climate change is destabilizing these countries. He's banned the export of family planning technology, a time when population is to satisfy evangelicals. And he just announced he's withdrawing our aid from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras until they control their people better, as if they have ability to somehow do that and just haven't heard from him, the instruction. So what's scary to me is we're actually making it worse, not actually thinking strategically about this problem. And the ultimate thing he wants to do is just put up a wall.
So I think we've done really well to get this far in the conversation. Just 10 minutes or so before we start
Trump,
the Q&A, and not mention Trump at that point. But since you opened up that box,
please,
let's run with it a little bit, because I suspect that the President of the United States may come up just once or twice in the questions we have. Let me ask a very simple question. Do you think that there will be a second Donald J. Trump term in office, and what will it do to world order if there is?
I have no idea who will win. I think it's just too early to tell. I've spent so much on the state of the economy and which Democrat
do you want to name any names on the Democrat side?
No, it really is way too early. And I think this will be an unusual election. I can't tell you exactly how, but I think this is going to be an election unlike any other.
Unlike the last one, which was completely normal.
Exactly. Even crazier than the last one.
We look forward to that.
Yeah. I think the United States can survive 4 years of Donald Trump, and our institutions will hold. I do not think we can survive 8 years.
What does not surviving mean?
That I think he will do irreparable damage to our system of justice, our institutions. I'll just give you a small example. We're now in his 3rd year of president. We have no ambassador in Saudi Arabia. We have no ambassador in Egypt. We have no ambassador in Jordan. We have no ambassador in Iraq, and we have no ambassador in Turkey. That's not a mistake. That's someone who just doesn't think those are important. It's actually true throughout the bureaucracy. And so how demoralizing that can be to a State Department? And now imagine that over 8 years. And again, the kind of people you get to be ambassadors also in this administration doesn't exactly strengthen those institutions. So you have a lot of young people to say, I'm going to go to Oxford, I'm going to study with Rana, I'd like to be in China, but hey, I don't want to go in the State Department now? Nobody cares about it at all. And that's just one example. So, these institutions we have, these are our crown jewels.
I've heard the two views on the Trump administration as an international actor. One is the view that essentially the administration is dismantling the international order as we've known it since 1945. The other is that, he tweets a lot, there's a lot of rhetoric, but when you look at the core policies, actually not such a big change. Which side, you sound like you'd fall more on the former.
Yeah, I think it's partly the part of the world, it depends on which part of the world you're talking about. On the question of China, one of my sort of best thinkers in China likes to say that Donald Trump is not the American president Americans deserve, but he is the American president China deserves. Okay, I think China got rich over the last 30 years with three main strategies: hard work, education, in smart investments in infrastructure, delayed gratification. National unity pulling together, number one basket. Second basket, stealing intellectual property, forced transfer of technology, non-reciprocal trade arrangements, and consistent violation of WTO rules. Third basket, the American Pacific Fleet. The American Pacific Fleet has been very important for China's growth because it allowed everyone on the periphery of China to feel we can be economically dominated by China, but we won't be physically and militarily dominated. But that second basket was, China got rich metaphorically using that second basket and the first I exaggerate, but t-shirts, tennis shoes, solar panels. If we allowed them to use the same strategy on aerospace, biomaterials, supercomputing, we'd be making a huge mistake, I think. And I think, therefore, Trump, some things are true even if Donald Trump believes them. And I'm a big believer of that.
Tom, it's not just Donald Trump, because you may not have heard, but we are very shortly about to do great trade deals with China once we liberate ourselves from the shackles of Europe. And if I may, I'm going to quote from the New York Times this morning, where with objectivity, calm, and a certain amount of restraint, your column today is headlined, "The United Kingdom has gone mad."
Yes.
You've obviously are not impressed by Brexit. Do you think, the question I have for you is, do you think actually this is just a little local difficulty? It's important to us, but the further you go away from Northwest Europe, the less it matters. Or is this something that has greater significance?
I think it has enormous significance. Let me put it in a broad historical context, and then I'll drill down. After the Second World War, I think the world, that we were lucky, we were blessed by having some great statesmen and women, but in those days more men than women, who built the institutions that governed the post-World War II world. And it was eventually the Common Market, it was the World Bank, it was the IMF, it was the United Nations, and a certain set of norms and values as well about non-seizure of territory and the like. We were very lucky, the statesmen who came together to build that world. I think in 1989, we reached another real critical junction with the collapse of communism. And we were again, and I was lucky enough to be covering Secretary of State James Baker then, to have a front row seat to another group of, I think, very talented and high-minded statesmen and women. George H.W. Bush, Margaret Thatcher, Jim Baker, Brent Scowcroft, Helmut Kohl, Francois Mitterrand, and most of all, Mikhail Gorbachev. And those people really, I think, designed the transition and shaped the transition of the post-1989 world. We were really lucky. 2007 is another fulcrum point. And I think our luck ran out. I don't think we have the kind of leaders with either the vision or, more importantly, the selflessness of those people. I don't want to exaggerate it, but the willingness to do the right thing. I think we have a real shortage of those leaders at another fulcrum point in history, and that makes me really nervous.
If we don't have those leaders, and clearly at least many millions of people who voted for them might think that we do, why don't we?
So that's probably, I just don't know, it's out of our skill set. I do, though, blame social media for some of it. I think it's just harder to be a leader today because you are constantly, you got so much chirping in your ear all the time. And I think that's part of it. That's not the whole story by any means, but I think that's part of the story.
Is part of it also that some have argued that 2 generations ago, most leaders had gone through the Second World War, either as leaders or they'd fought. And the generation after that had fought the Cold War and understood the nuclear stakes. And the generation that came of age after 1990 didn't exactly have either of those things.
And I think that's very true. I don't think, I mean, the whole, Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing, that was just part of the sort of frivolousness of that era. But what troubles me, Brexit's not my business per se. This is the choices for the British people. What troubles me is how poorly the choice was prepared and presented. I would have expected 100 different competing studies on what would be the implications of Brexit. I'm not sure the government did even one. If they did one, I didn't. It wasn't widely publicized. And what bothers me, I'll be very blunt. It's playing with big systems. You don't play. The EU is a big system. You can be for it or against it. I totally respect that. But don't play with it. Don't say, I'm going to be for Brexit because I know it's going to fail, and then when it fails, I'll be able to position myself as the guy who was against it, and that will allow me to take over the Conservative Party, and my name's Boris Johnson, and
tell us what you really think.
Yeah, and so I call that playing with big systems. And then what happens? They never thought the dog would catch the car, and the dog caught the car. And now it's sitting on the hood, and it's barking at you, And you're playing with big systems. You can be against it, you can be for it, but you have to be serious about it. And being serious about it is answering several questions. What world am I living in? What are the biggest trends in this world? And how do I align my country to get the most out of these trends and cushion the worst? And is the EU helpful in that or not? Well, I think one world you're living in is a world of rapidly accelerating change. And in a world of rapid change, the most open system wins because you get the signals first, you respond fastest, and you attract the most high IQ risk takers because they want to work in open systems. You're living in a world where all the problems are global. And all the solutions have to be global. And if you want to have a say in those solutions, and your name is not Russia, China, America, or India, you better be part of a larger coalition,
Tom, we could go on for ages, but we've got to open up to the audience in a moment because there are so many other views. I just want to ask one last thing before we open up. And I'm sure there'll be views on Trump, Brexit, in both directions in an audience this large. So we'll see what we hear. You've told us at least 3 big overarching stories that we need to be aware of. But you also travel the world and you see a lot of stuff that the rest of us don't get to see. If there's one small, quirky, unexpected thing that you've seen somewhere in the world recently that you'd like us to know about, what might that be?
It's a good question, and really it's something I ended my book on, right? And it's really been guiding my journalism a lot lately. And that is the fact that, the cliche about America is that we're a country divided between 2 coasts. 2 coasts that are liberalizing, pluralizing, globalizing, and diversifying. And then there's flyover America, where everyone's high in opioids, voted for Trump, and waiting for 1950 to come back. Okay, that's sort of that's the cliche, you know what I mean? In fact, America is a checkerboard of towns and communities, some of which are actually rising from the bottom up amazingly, and others that are collapsing from the bottom down, truly collapsing into opioid abuse, suicide, unemployment, and divorce. And what I've been trying to focus on and understand since I wrote my book is what distinguishes one from the other. And so I'll tell you the backstory of the biggest column, literally the longest column I've written in the last year. I got a call from my lecture agent last winter, and he said, you got a lecture request to speak in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Town in eastern Pennsylvania, for a group called the Hourglass Foundation. Do a book talk. So I agreed to do it. A week before I go out there, my agent calls and says, I forgot to tell you, you have to do a 90-minute reception with the group before the talk. I said to him, Carlton, you're killing me. 90 minutes before I talk? I'll be dead. No, part of the deal. So I go there, and I brace myself for this reception in Lancaster. And I go into the room, and suddenly it's, hi, I'm from the Lancaster Health Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Youth Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Lead Abatement Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Housing Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Anti-Poverty Coalition. I suddenly realized I'm in an amazing place. Before the evening's done, I've already arranged to come back and interview everybody in the town's leadership. And last June, I wrote a piece on Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Lancaster, Pennsylvania was a dying town. In the 1990s, no one would go downtown. And in 2018, Lancaster, Pennsylvania was named by Forbes magazine one of the 10 coolest cities in America. And I went back and told the story of how this got turned around. And the basic story is that the Hourglass Foundation was called the Hourglass Foundation because they thought the hour was late. And what happened was the town's leaders came together and they built what I call a complex adaptive coalition, where the business community partnered with the philanthropic community, partnered with the education community, partnered with the social entrepreneurial community, partnered with city government. They created a complex adaptive coalition. They meet every Friday morning around the kitchen table in Art Mann's house, and they plotted the rebuilding of their town, and over a 20-year period. So I call this a complex adaptive coalition. Their philosophy is what works. You check your politics at the door. We only do what works here. And I told the story about how the big breakthrough was when they got a convention center. They got the budget for a convention center, a new hotel in the heart of the town. And the budget process went through, and I'll end here, when the local Republican congressman teamed up with the Democratic mayor and got the bond issue through, got the government to back the bond issue. And wouldn't you know, Ron, in the next election, the Democratic mayor forgot to endorse the Democrat running against the Republican congressman. Okay. So if you want to be an optimist about America today, stand on your head. My country looks so much better from the bottom up than from the top down. And that is because these coalitions are coming together actually all over the country. We have communities that are falling apart. Do not get me wrong. But the country is actually a checkerboard. And what distinguishes the communities that are rising from those that are falling is a whole new leadership category. It's something my teacher, Getty Greenstein, calls leaders without authority. These are people in the community who step forward and just say, not going to happen here.
An optimistic note is a great place at which to switch the direction of our conversation.
Yeah, that's right. I can usually ruin any dinner party, and I do weddings and bar mitzvahs. Okay, so it's but I'll do this event.
Indeed. Well, we're very glad to have that positive note on which to turn out to our huge audience here today at the Emmanuel Center. We have a 3 over there. Could we give that to? Yeah.
Thank you so much for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.
When it comes to globalization...
Could you stand up? Sorry, can I say, everyone, could you stand up when you speak so you can be seen properly? Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm holding because the lights in my eyes.
Big issue that's erupted, particularly ever since 2016 now, is cybersecurity.
Yeah.
We're about to move into the Internet of Things. We're about to move into the driverless cars. We're about to move into clothes with chips in them. And so far, we have several terrible products on the market in cybersecurity. Yeah. Do you see any new trend in cybersecurity that's coming out, particularly in relation to the events of 2016? Or is it still coming under the radar, do you think? And this will bite us bad?
It's a really good question, an important question. I'm not an expert on cybersecurity, but I would say the challenge is about to actually explode, and today is a memorable day because our biggest telecom company called Verizon today launched its 5G network. Now, 5G, people don't realize how important this is. I mean, we had a steam engine, we had electrification, we had digitization, and we're now going to have 5G. And it is of that scale of change. A video, a movie, a Hollywood film that took you 8 minutes to download will now take you 8 seconds with 0 latency as this gets deployed. And it will truly course through the whole economy. And the cyber implications of that will be enormous. And so we've got this arms race going on all the time between the bad guys and the good guys. And I wish I could tell you the good guys have won, the race is over, but they haven't. And bad guys are always early adopters. So, because
who are the bad guys in this scenario, Tom?
I mean, bad guys are criminals, they're foreign countries, they're all kinds of people. So I wish I could tell you we're on top of this. I can't. I think it's going to be something we're going to have to live with for a long, long time.
Tom, we have number 4 over there.
Yeah.
Yes, lady.
Thank you for that. It was really interesting. Firstly, just want to add that Twitter is 280 characters. I don't know if that changes your perspective on the matter. It seems to me that I'm going to marry a couple of your interests here in my question. It seems to me that looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, looking at the state of intergovernmental relations between Israel and Palestinians is somewhat of a red herring.
Yeah.
The problem really lies at the intercommunal level. There is not good relations between Israelis and Palestinians, ordinary Israelis and Palestinians. While social media has a deleterious impact on the state of political discourse across the world, I do just wonder if the younger generation growing up with a better, more refined social media etiquette could actually lead to improved discourse between young Israelis and Palestinians, which could actually potentially lead to some sort of solution in the future. So I just kind of wanted to hear
it's interesting.
your thoughts on that.
That's a very thoughtful question. I tend not to invest technology with that kind of power. My own experience is that that what actually creates that breakthrough you're talking about is not technology, but actually politics in this sense. I've always believed that Israelis will never really be truly at home unless Palestinians are at home. And Palestinians will never be truly at home and able to take their shoes off unless Israelis are. And the reason that becomes important is because it's only then that the Israeli says to the Palestinian, once they're both secure in their own space, what were you trying to tell me about humiliation? What were you trying to tell? I mean, that's when they hear, and that's when the Palestinian says to the Israeli, what were you trying to tell me about the Holocaust? You were trying to I remember you're trying to tell me something. It's only when people are secure in their own space, and then you know what? They don't need Twitter, they don't need Facebook, just need an old telephone or to meet, for coffee. But I think the politics has to get right first.
Yeah, lady over here, excellent. Number 3.
Hi, fantastic speech.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You spoke about the fact that you didn't want people to invade your space and tell you what you think. The greatest thing that's hitting the world at the moment is teenage mental health and how it affects. And I know there's a huge campaign with the Royals. There's a huge campaign to protect teenagers.
Yes.
And it's easy for you to switch off and say you're not going to listen.
Right.
I would say that that's one of the hugest impacts on future leaders, is that they're listening too much and they care too much. And that's why our rates of suicide, especially young men, is going up. People listen, the teenagers are listening too much, so that's why they don't create good leaders, because they're worried about what people think about them.
Yeah, I think that's I don't have anything to add, just to add to your point. And there's another dimension of it, which I got into in my book. I have an interesting interview with our Surgeon General, our leading government doctor, Vivek Murthy. And I was interviewing him when I was writing the book, and I said to him one day, Vivek, what's the most prevalent disease in America? Is it heart disease, cancer, or diabetes? He said, it's none of those. It's isolation. I said, wait a minute. We live in the most connected age in history, and you're telling me that basically depression-related isolation. And you saw that with the guy, this terrible person who shot up the mosque in New Zealand. All these guys have pretty much the same profile. They're kind of marinating at home in all these websites alone. They don't have strong relationships with people. And that's why I just really so worry about, you have all these teenagers who see their friends on Instagram. Why was I not invited to that party? I must be ugly. I must be unpopular, And so I talk the talk of technology, but I actually don't walk the walk. I'm a late adopter of a lot of things. I get it. I'm a privileged. I have a column in the New York Times. You know what I mean? So I understand that. But at the same time, my wife edits all my columns. Literally, virtually every column, except maybe one from the Arctic. My wife has edited. And so I've also got someone I really trust who would look out, for but also is not the least bit afraid to telling me that is the worst column you've ever written, and you need to start over, okay? And so, but we all kind of need that kind of person in our lives today, and unfortunately, I feel there's so many young people that are getting marinated in some really dangerous stuff.
Number 1 has been extremely patient, so right at the back of the hall. Go ahead.
Hello, it's been very insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask on your views on the U.S.-Mexico relations and, more broadly speaking, U.S.-Latin America relations in the short and longer terms. Thank you.
Very good question. I think we are so lucky, America. We have this North American platform. We have this neighbor to the south that's democratizing, shares a lot of our value. Our culture is integrated with our economy. We have a neighbor to the north the same way. The last people in the world I would want to antagonize is Mexico. I mean, we're so lucky to have this stable neighbor. And I really fear that Donald Trump has hit on a campaign tool which is making people frightened, or either culturally frightened or physically frightened, using Mexico in particular and Latin Americans in general as his foil. And we're so lucky. Mexico's been amazingly patient, you know. I mean, the only real blowback was when former President Vicente Fox said, "We're not going to pay for your fucking wall," you know. All I ask of my Mexican friends is just wait this out. Hopefully, it's about 18 more months, you know, and hopefully we'll get things back to normal. But thanks for your question.
We have a number 2 over there.
Thank you very much. Very interesting
Thank
opinions.
You. Oh, thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
Right over there.
Please, yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to hear your opinion about Turkey and considering the most recent local elections.
Just for anyone here who hasn't been following Turkey, to some people's surprise, the opposition did extremely well in Ankara, Istanbul, and other cities, pushing back against Erdogan in the elections the last few days.
Thank you. I just think this is fantastic, what happened, because the thing I love about being a reporter is that people always surprise you. And just when one of these dictators thinks they've got it all wired, I got all the courts, I got all the TV, I got all the newspaper, I got all the business, along come the people and they actually tell them what they think. And now, I don't want to exaggerate it. It was the big cities, but they're very important. And for them to triumph over a deck that was so stacked against them gives me actually hope as an American vis-a-vis Trump. Seriously, it gives me hope for Russians vis-a-vis Putin. Because we've kind of got a whole class of leaders around the world today. Erdogan, Sisi, MBS, Putin, they've all kind of stacked the deck in a way. And there's this feeling like there's nothing we can do. And God bless the people of Turkey. I think they sent a very important message that had the whole Brexit debate not been going on here, I think it would have been a huge story around the world.
But just briefly on that, Tom, the difference between Erdogan and MBS and so forth is that he was elected in elections which were, you know, a popular mandate. Many of us here, liberals, do not like the fact he was elected, but he was in a different category from pure dictators.
Right. Well, you know what I've learned over the years, Rana, and I think you'll agree with me on China. I found that dictators are the most intense pollers in the world.
Certainly true in China.
Yeah, dictators, because they're always insecure. And so, you know, there's a song by Neon Trees. It's a rock group that I really like because it has a line in it that I've always found to be true in my journalism, which is that everybody talks. You think they're not talking to each other in Turkey, in China. No, they actually know who's stealing, who's who's corrupt, who's being abusive, and you'll never know when it's going to come out. And so I don't think any leader today, no matter how repressive he is or she is, whatever, is sitting comfortably on their throne. Everybody talks.
We have number 3 over here.
Mr. Friedman, if you were President Trump, what card would you play in order to unlock the political stalemate currently happening in Venezuela?
That is a really good question. Question number 4 up there, please. Somebody had a 4. Oh, there it is. No. I wish I had. I've only been to Venezuela once. I wish I had a more intelligent answer for you. But here's what I think we're doing, and not doing too badly, but you tell me. And it gets to that line on my business card, which is amplification. So I've learned the hard way how much I don't know about countries. But there's one thing I think I can still see, and that is when someone is doing the right thing in a country that we care about, try to amplify it. And so I think that's what we're trying to do with the opposition. I think we're not going to invade Venezuela. We shouldn't be invading Venezuela. I think we're trying to be very careful about what we do, but there's clearly a large number of Venezuelans that want to change in the political system, but there's also a very rooted group that's holding on. And I think in this kind of situation, the smartest thing for us to do is do everything we can to amplify the democratic forces. Ultimately, Venezuelans have to sort this out. I hope they do it peacefully, but I'm really into amplification now. And I kind of think that's what we're doing. And it seems to be tilted more in the right direction in the wrong direction, I hope. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And we have number 4 over here.
Tom, I read your column judiciously for many, many years. I have read all your books.
Bless your heart.
He's brought them all to sign as well.
Yeah. My question is, with Bob Mueller's investigation complete and out, and apparently Trump escaping, does it enhance his chances for a second term?
It's a very important question. So I personally, I never really wrote much about collusion. I just never saw a smoking gun in what was reported in the press, and I never thought Trump was organized enough to collude. Okay, but I would urge you to hold that question. Remember, the report's almost 400 pages. Can you imagine what's in there? All you know is the conclusion, which was that a fair-minded, special counsel said, I got all this evidence, not that he's innocent. In fact, it clearly said this does not exonerate him, but I don't think in a court of law I can prove it to indict the president. So right now, Donald Trump's having a really good time using that, part of the Mueller report to drive home as much as he can. He's trying to do this deliberately. I've been exonerated. But today, the U.S. Congress, the Democrats, subpoenaed the full document, said we don't want a redacted version, and I promise you it will come out. And when it does, it will not be a good day for Donald Trump. But that said, I'm a big believer. I do not want Donald Trump impeached unless there truly are provable high crimes and misdemeanors. I think it is vitally important for America that we vote him out the way he was voted in, that he see and we see that we could render a judgment on this man, and that the world see that America came back to its senses and can render a judgment on this man. I do not want him impeached. I want him voted out the way he was voted in.
Number 2, yes.
It's going back to the Middle East, and really with reference to Jordan, which, as you mentioned, has all these refugees from so many different countries. Jordan has no natural resources and has to be boosted by UN and anybody else in America and so on. Why is it? What can we do to make the Middle East oil states pay for their own and look after their own? Why does it have to fall on Jordan?
Jordan alone, it's a very good question. One good thing that both Obama and Trump have done is that they've massively increased our aid. We're now giving close to $2 billion a year to Jordan, which is not insignificant amount of money. Jordan's core problem actually all happened as a result of the Arab Spring, a byproduct of it. When the Arab Spring happened in Egypt, anti-regime forces in the Sinai cut the gas pipeline from Egypt to Jordan. And Jordan had really shifted its whole energy system over to natural gas, much cheaper, much more sustainable. When the pipeline was broken, they had to start re-importing diesel fuel, and it may also have been coal. They had to redo their whole energy system, and it put them $7.5 billion in debt. And that's what the IMF now has been trying to help them work out. You know, it'd be nice, obviously, if any of the Gulf states just wrote them a check and made that debt go away. And by all rights, they should be. But it's not likely to happen. And I think that raising that question, that's one of the things we should be doing. Again, that would be a great job for the American president to be doing, or for the European Union to really make an issue of it. Because Jordan is absorbing all these refugees, helping keep the region stable. It's doing a great service. I mean, it's quite remarkable. They have 2 shifts of school a day, you know, for Syrian refugees and other refugees, you know, to be able to go to school as well. I mean, I think they're doing a very noble thing. I'm glad you draw attention to it. I try to draw attention to it. I think we can't do that enough. So thank you.
If they don't write a check, maybe the Chinese will. Who knows?
That would be.
Let's take number 3.
In anticipation of tonight, I thought I'd do a bit of research on you. So obviously, I started at Wikipedia. In the first paragraph, it seems to say that you're a staunch supporter of the Iraq War. So obviously, I sort of clicked a few hyperlinks and could see a 2003 column from you. But you did say that it had to be sort of anti-Saddam and the chances of sort of progressive and democratic impacts on the region.
Yeah.
My question is basically, in hindsight, do you think there's any way that an armed invasion of Iraq could have had led to a positive impact on the region and the world?
It's an important question, and obviously one I've been asked before. As you said, I kind of had my own reasons for supporting the war, which were not about WMD at all. I believed that unless we could partner with people in the Middle East to bring more consensual government and pluralism there, both political pluralism, religious pluralism, and gender pluralism, that part of the world was going to go off a cliff. And so I was never into the WMD part of the war. My view was, if you're going to go to war, let's do it for the right reasons. And that's really how I came into it. The question is, could it ever have worked? I don't know, but I would argue that we never gave it a try, because when we went in and immediately took apart the Iraqi army and de-Baathified the government, we basically took a big part of the population and told them, you're not going to be part of the future of this country. And that led to the backlash and whatnot, and the disaster. That then was exacerbated by the ISIS thing. I think the interesting question today, though, about Iraq, and I'm glad you bring it up, is that you know, one of the things about the Iraq War we'll never know, and that's the counterfactual. What if Saddam had stayed? And again, for me, if Saddam had stayed, I don't think there would have been some nuclear thing. I think Iraq could look a lot like Syria today. Now, Iraq's been through its own hell, own kind of hell, since the war. But if you look at Iraq today, it's had multiple elections. It's got huge corruption problems. It's got still huge internal refugee problems. But it's kind of stumbling its way forward, you know, to some kind of consensual power sharing. You don't have what's going on in Syria going on there today. And the question for me going forward is this. I will never feel anything but regret for the price that was paid in Iraq by Iraqis, by Brits, by Americans. But you can overpay for diamonds and you can overpay for cut glass. And my focus since the war has been always to try to nurture this thing in a way that we'll overpaid for something that actually created some kind of decency there. We have it in Kurdistan. I hope we get it in the rest of Iraq. So I have nothing but regret for how that played out, but I still believe and would not back away from my belief that unless we could find a way to partner with people there to bring more consensual government, pluralism to that part of the world, you're going to get one Syria and Libya after another.
And we can squeeze in one very last quick question and quick answer before we have to wrap up. Number 1 over there.
No pressure.
Not at all.
Last question. Thank you. In the beginning, you talked about 3 factors that are reshaping the world, Moore's Law being one. But then you said there were 5 areas that you see being influenced, ethics being one. Can you just expand on that?
Concisely.
So, yeah, I'm actually going to take a few minutes on that one, because it's actually very important. So my chapter on ethics is called, Is God in Cyberspace? And it's actually the best question I ever got on book tour. It was 1999. I was selling a book called Lexus and the Olive Tree. And I was in Portland, Oregon, came to question time just like this, and a young man stood up in the balcony, said, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? And I said, I have no idea. And I felt like an idiot. So I came home and I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi I got to know when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem. His name's Zvi Marks, a brilliant Talmudist. Now lives in Amsterdam, married to a Dutch priest, interesting character. I called Zvi in Amsterdam, and I said, Zvi, I got a question I've never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? He said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. One is a biblical concept that the Almighty is almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, prevarication, people smearing one another on Twitter, and now we know fake news, okay? But fortunately, he said, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of God says God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. Only we can bring God into cyberspace. Really liked his answer. I put it into the 2000 paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 16 years. I sat down to write this new book, and I found myself retelling that story spontaneously. And one day I sat myself down and said, why are you retelling that story? And the answer became immediately clear to me. It was for two reasons, and one just happened. I think in the last couple of years, we, at least in the developed world, we began living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. That's where you go now to find a date, find a spouse, buy a book, write a book, sell a book, buy a house, buy a car, get a mortgage, do your brokerage, get your news, make your news, send your pictures. We're now living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. And what's my definition of cyberspace? It's a realm where we're all connected and no one's in charge. We're all connected and no one's in charge. There's no courts in cyberspace, no police, no firemen, no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. But that's where we're living 51% of our lives. In other words, we're living 51% of our lives in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And at the same time, because of my accelerations, we're now standing at a moral intersection we have never stood at before as a species. In 1945, we entered a world where one country could kill all of us post-Hiroshima. I think we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us. And at the same time, where all of us could actually fix everything. These accelerated powers are creating a world where one of us could kill all of us, and all of us, if we put our mind to it, we now have the tools to feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet. We have never been to this intersection before. What is this intersection? We have never been more godlike as a species than we are today. We'll put those two together. You've never lived more of your life in a realm that's God-free, and we have never been more godlike. What does that mean? It means what every single person thinks, feels, and believes today really matters. It means everyone needs to be in the grip of sustainable values, and at a minimum, the golden rule, do unto others as you wish them to do unto you, because you now live in a world where more people can do unto you farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before, and you can do unto others farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Everyone needs to be in the grip of the golden rule, and every faith and culture has their version of it. I know what you're thinking. I gave this part of my talk as the commencement address a few years ago at Olin College of Engineering. And I told the parents at graduation, I know what you're thinking. You paid $200,000 so your kid could get an engineering degree. And who do they bring in as the commencement speaker? But a knucklehead promoting the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And what I told them is what I would tell you. Naivete is the new realism. Because I'll tell you what's really naive. Thinking we're going to be okay in a world that gets this interdependent, where men, women, and machines get this super empowered, if everyone is not in the grip of sustainable values. Where do people learn the golden rule? 2 places: strong families and healthy communities. I'm not an expert on strong families. I hope I built one. Would never presume to lecture anyone on that. But I am an expert on healthy communities because I grew up in one, a little town outside of Minneapolis called St. Louis Park. And that's why my book ends in the little town where I grew up and learned these values. And that's why I said at the beginning, what I'd repeat now, that the faster the world gets, all the old stuff matters more than ever. All the stuff you cannot download, but have to upload the old-fashioned way: good parenting to good child, good pastor to good flock, good teacher to good student. It's all the stuff you can't download that matters more than ever. Thank you. Thank you.